You'd think my music career would be perfect. My rock and roll. I know. It's like that. Oh, right there. Nice. Oh, no, we're not there. It's over there. No. That's the clicker. Look at how old I am. It's a clicker. Oh, that's okay. Do you want me to go back? What is happening here? You're welcome. This totally makes sense that it would be like this for us.
It's over there.
I don't know. Let's try. So back is. Hey. All right.
We're on that screen
Oh,
too.
great. Thanks. Hi. So some of us were up on the stage yesterday, and we are the KT6 crew from Peterborough, working under and with PARN, which is the Peterborough Aids Resource Network. To all of our Peterborough people out there, hi. Thank you for all your help. I'm on stage right now with a couple of the KT6 and a fellow Melissa, who also works with PARN. I'm going to break those systems. Where do we go? And our slogan is do no harm in harm reduction, or no harm in harm reduction. That's just our mission statement. Well, that's our peer support coordinator. I'm the peer support coordinator for PARN. And who the KT6 are, they are keeping the six. That's what KT6 means, which means looking after each other, keeping each other's back safe, protecting them, making sure that we're looking after and not doing harm to them, and helping to stop the harm that has happened to them in the past. And crew meaning compassion, respect, educate, and welcome. The KT6 crew is a harm reduction, not-profit advisory group providing values over abstinence, fighting stigma, and building power for those without a place of unity in their community. And I will stop being nervous in a minute. Who wants to do that? Do I do it? You want to do the KT6 mission?
Okay, mission statement. KT6 crew will provide a safe environment for people who use drugs and reduce the accidental drug poisoning deaths, transmission of diseases and infection, public substance use, and discarded needles. KT6 Crew is a compassionate, comprehensive, and collaborative group that provides options when people are ready for change. KT6 Crew will contribute to the improved sharing of balance with community resources. Our goal is the inclusion and union of PWUD into community life, leading to belonging and improved quality and dignity of life.
So with that, the KT6 crew has come in place through a very slow moving process. I got the job with PARN and they gave me a title and I was like, that doesn't mean anything. I need something to happen here. And I was upset with the fact that a lot of the peers at the organization and other organizations were still feeling pressure to do harm with it. Maybe if they weren't trying to do harm, they were doing harm to people out there that they were trying to do harm reduction with. Some of that fear and trauma that they are experiencing and causing comes from their fear of losing a job as a peer. If they step out and say, that makes me uncomfortable, they might be seen as weaker or not doing the job properly because there's so much stigma about peer work and about being a user or a past user. So the KT6 group came together by me working at the harm reduction place in Peterborough and introducing myself and not ambushing anyone and just having people come up and ask me who the fuck I was. And I would let them come around and see if they wanted to talk and ask how harm reduction has hurt them and how we as PARN and other organizations can do better to help when they're ready. And so as I did that, more people came to PARN's office. We supplied what they requested, which was food and welcome and to not be judged, and putting together a project, which hopefully will be a program for people who are living while using drugs, being without being housed, without having a roof, living in shelters, being Indigenous, trying to give them a safe place to come in and bitch. But not, they can't just come in and bitch or like wince or anything. They have to have solutions. So we work on a solution-based project. So if they're going to come in, we talk about something that's happened and maybe sit down and talk about how it could go better, along with the play that we're going to be putting on, which is the Theater of the Oppressed, which we'll get to. With that, we started with 4 people. We are at 20 now, and this is in 3.5 months. They go out on the harm reduction truck with us, with me, and they do the work. They are paid their honoraria. They know the wound care. They talk to EFRI and tell EFRI about where people are, and EFRI also talks to them about what they can get, services for them. They are the professionals. They know where people are in the community and where services are needed. They need to be listened to the most. And that's our job, is to listen. And their mission statement is written by them, for them, and for others that they are representing and trying to help. Oh, who we are. That's them. That's me. You all know me. Don't need to introduce me. Oh, you want to?
I'm going to
Oh,
introduce
good.
Okay, so this is Star. She goes by she, they. Star is a survivor of rock and roll and the drugs of the 90s and 2000s. Star has a deep history in harm reduction and anti-oppressive practices and currently facilitates the KT6 Crew on topics of harm reduction, homelessness, mental health, and building a new world while taking the harm out of harm reduction.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, look, it's the words we crossed out yesterday. I'll introduce myself because I'm allowed to say them. Hi, I'm Melissa Higgs. I'm a white settler on Turtle Island, a disabled fat tranny dyke, and a substance user who's moved on from dope to other substances. She works making frontline harm reduction in Ogojiwanong, formerly colonially Peterborough, and helps facilitate a peer group of experts on homelessness, substance use, and multiple marginalizations.
Jules and Ruckus, you met them yesterday. Ruckus! He's napping. Scotty, you also met Scotty yesterday. Scotty's somewhere. There, back there. Hi, Scotty. Tanya. Tanya is a peer support advisor with the KT6 Crew who knows firsthand how social services can and have failed users and marginalized people. Tanya is a practical nurse and a community service worker. Tanya loves the fish and the outdoors.
So I joined the KT6 group about 2 months ago. And the first thing is I noticed as I was accepted, I was supported by my peers. It was a very relaxed atmosphere. It helped give me some purpose in life and helped with my mental health, and it reduced my usage. I live 40 minutes away from Peterborough, and I'm on OW. So I approached my OW worker for some assistance with transportation to get to this because I felt this was very important for my future. And I was told that if I'm well enough to volunteer, then I am well enough to work. I felt that they just had a very misunderstanding about the stepping stones to becoming healthy, which I feel that if there was more harm reduction system navigators in that position, it would have helped me better. I feel that PARN and KT6 Crew will help me in the future obtain sustainable employment. Thank you.
We're at 10 minutes. Do you want to go through the rest of the slides, or do we want to focus
Go
in
ahead.
on me. Oh, cool. I hate being the organizer, but sometimes necessary.
No, I love it.
So I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'm just going to read what we wrote for the program and expand a little bit on that. Harm reduction approaches flow from full-body commitment to the philosophies and practices developed by people who use drugs, descended from the harm reduction practices originally developed in the AIDS activism movement. At their core, these approaches recognize the individual as the expert in their own life to provide the tools and support necessary for that individual to use substances as best they can and more generally survive and thrive in a world that rarely holds space for them. Two things that I really wanted to highlight from what I wrote there is that harm reduction is descended from the AIDS activism movement. PARN is an AIDS service organization. And so we're doing this work in a long lineage of queer and allied activists, that were fighting literally for their lives throughout the 80s and 90s, throughout the AIDS epidemic. And so much of what was learned and established there is incredibly valid and important doing harm reduction. And unfortunately, a lot of history is being lost because things are being repositioned. And it's kind of happened by default, but like we're known as the needle people or like the harm reduction people around town, which we are, but we're an AIDS service organization and that needs to inform the work we do. So I just wanted to shout out that activism movement, that lineage, and to encourage people that if you're not aware of that connection, to do some research, because when that history is lost, we lose a lot of the effectiveness in doing this work because our forebears like fought and died for this. And if we're not respecting that, which honestly, we're not in this movement of harm reduction, we need to change that. And the second thing I wanted to highlight from reading that is right at the end, in a world that rarely holds space for them, oftentimes in doing this work, really just to do it day by day and survive, we see it as a very individual thing. Like, how do I get this individual their sterile needles? How do I make sure this person has got clean crack stems? How do I make sure this person is going to have someone to advocate if they go to the hospital? And because we need to, because we are trying to help save these individual lives, we see this from a very individualistic standpoint. The problem isn't in anything these individuals are doing or not doing in these lives. The problem is capitalism, colonialism, is whiteness, is the systems that we exist in. And I don't fault us for taking an individualistic approach in harm reduction, because that's what's needed to be done on a day-by-day basis to help keep our people alive. But speaking to my fellow white people in the room, we're fucking up. We're not doing a good enough job of the people who honestly are most at risk that we are trying to help. People who are Indigenous, people who are Black or otherwise racialized, people who are disabled, people who are queer. These are people that are the most likely to die from a toxic drug poisoning. These are people who are most likely to be unhoused and unable to access services. And I'm lucky to work for a radical organization that gets things right a lot of the time. And even we are not doing the work that we should be doing for our priority. We call them our priority populations, and we're not prioritizing them. So I want to put it out to the room, and some people might take it personally and work on that. That's great. For those of you that don't, think of the privileges and the power that you have in your organization as a white person doing this work, and the other privileges that you have, recognizing that you too, yes, are mostly marginalized in other ways, but whiteness trumps everything. If we're white people doing this work, we are not doing a good enough job to weaponize that and to help people that do not have access to power that whiteness gives us. So how do you do better? Fuck, that's a very, very large question. The one thing you're not gonna do is go home to your org and ask your one Indigenous coworker how to do this, or your one Black coworker how to do this. It is on you, okay? Google is free. Fuck, Google like Scholar is free now. There's a lot of really, really good stuff out there. It is on us to educate ourselves how to do better. And once you have done that preliminary work, begun establishing rapport, then yes, go to your Indigenous coworker and be like, hey, you don't get enough funding and I do. How do I pass this on to you? Or you never seem to get check recs done on time. Why is that? Can we get you your shit and not have to make you wait? Supporting the people within our organizations that have these marginalizations, that don't have a proximity to power that we have by virtue of our whiteness, is the first step in beginning to help the people in our communities that are facing that same thing. So please, I'm begging us, we need to do better. Thank you.
I know it, but I'm going to ruin it. So when I created this project, which will be a program, fucking everywhere, do it. The this is kind of the method that I worked with. It's a Mia Mingus pod supportive care. And you start with asking the person who they need to speak to and who they want to speak to, who they trust to speak to. And it's not going to be me because they didn't know me. Maybe it's me now, who knows? But you ask them what best supports them. And you start with a few pods saying like, you know, is your drug dealer the person you need in a case of trauma? Yes. Okay, well, let's get you safely to your drug dealer so that you can be well. And then bring you back from your drug dealer so that you can also be well and make sure to keep your fucking six. I swear a lot. You're welcome. And then I can't read it. Oh yeah. So how do you want to be care forward? Who are your peer supports? That can be, you know, it's all subjective. It can change moment by moment so that the pods get to change. We take a look at those pods or who their people are and they can move. And that's the thing that we want to tell people and work with is that it doesn't have to be that person every day. It can be for the moment. Let's experience what you're going through at this moment and what helps you, who helps you. Do you need an orange? You know, like it's simple, but without fucking people over. It's just a little, it goes really deep. I'm not going to get big into it, but we're really looking on how to dismantle harm reduction from the white person's damage that's been done throughout the universe. As a white person, I'm just fucking mad. I don't know how else to end it off other than that. Just like take a look, think about it. It does work. It's proven. Mia Mingus has done a lot of really great work in the past. And it's just, I think if I could say anything else is like, don't fucking race to make change. You can't. We're turtles. We got to go slow. When you go slow, you don't hurt anybody, but you do less harm than trying to race to save everything. Just take your time. Don't ambush. We're fucking awkward. And you're welcome. Thank you.
Just wondering. Okay, cool. Okay, so before I start my presentation, again, I would like to acknowledge that Frontline Baddies operates off the north of Turtle Island. We strive for decolonization, land back, and acknowledgement of continued colonization through the Canadian government. We are a group of humans that are Indigenous, refugee, immigrant, and settlers to Turtle Island. We acknowledge our ancestors' plight for us to be here. We acknowledge our siblings' trauma in this line of work. We did not choose it, it chose us. So my name is Aileen Tran. I am a daughter of 2 Vietnam War refugees. I'm a frontline worker with lived experience. I've been working in the social sector since 2019. I've worked in various settings from child sex trafficking education, prevention education, group homes, youth treatment, homeless youth outreach. Currently, I'm focused on working in the SROs, single room occupancies, all up and down the downtown East Hastings. I worked at 30 different projects, and depending on where they need me. I'm also working out of the 2 lowest barrier shelters in North America. So around this time last year, this summer, I lost about 4 or 5 youth in the span of the summer to overdoses. And I remember crying in the donations closet, as I do on my shifts. And I received a phone call from my lovely colleague and good friend Tracy here. And I remember she was kind of in a similar space where we were both just like burned out at both ends. And she said to me, we need to do more than just memes. We need to create a community of frontline workers, because often we do feel alone in this line of work, but it's not true. There are a lot of us out there, and we just wanted to create a space where we can get together and heal. So today we'll be touching on what harm reduction is, how it started in Vancouver's downtown east side, and harm reduction in housing and healthcare. So you might notice through my presentation that I may be using different terms that are different than the ones that you guys are used to out here. In the West Coast, we are used to seeing substance use, whereas out here, I'm hearing a lot of drug use. I do really appreciate the term substance use. I use this term because it does destigmatize use. You'll also notice I won't be using the term clean needles, rather using terms like new or fresh needles. So what is harm reduction? The term is quite self-explanatory. It's about keeping people alive, reducing preventable harm. The leading cause of preventable deaths in the world is vehicle collision. In Canada, approximately 1,000 people die every year from hunting accidents. And there are over 400 fatal drownings every year. So do we go ahead and ban hunting and swimming and driving? No, we put in safety measures to reduce the harm. So we have bars, seatbelts, mandatory orange vest for hunting, and life jackets and lifeguards. Bars and pubs are basically overdose prevention sites, if we think about it, with bartenders having to be certified so that they can serve responsibly. So why are we condemning people who are wanting to use a very similar resource to make sure that they're using their substance of choice? People use substances for a million different reasons, whether that is a glass of wine after a stressful day or smoking heroin to stay alive. Honestly, it's none of your business. And it's nobody else's business. And people should not have to justify their usage. Blaming is unproductive and serves no place in problem solving. We approach addiction, and when we approach addiction and homelessness with a harm reduction mindset, we are practicing empathy. And that's what harm reduction is. It's radicalized empathy. We are asking people who are directly affected by these issues, what do you guys need? And giving them options instead of forcing policies onto these people made by people who would never understand their situation. So let's look at the harm reduction history and how it started in Vancouver's downtown east side. So the epidemic of HIV and AIDS in Vancouver first spiked in the mid-1980s and then again in the 1990s. The reason behind the second outbreak was because Vancouver's injection substance user, or also known as IDU, population was experiencing a shift from heroin to cocaine injection. With heroin, an individual may injection once or twice daily because the high would last several hours. Whereas a short high associated from cocaine users had to inject upwards to 40 times a day. Since the amount of injections skyrocketed, there was a significant shortage of new needles, and this is during a time when needles were already hard to access to begin with. This resulted in the reuse and sharing of needles. As you can see, oh no, sorry, you'll see the photo later, but the outbreak was further complicated by socioeconomic and political factors. So Vancouver's injection substance user population was pushed to the downtown east side, the city's poorest neighborhood. Along the downtown east side strip, there are many hotels that became affordable SROs, or single room occupancies. However, these factors were further compounded by the eventual gentrification of the downtown east side due to Expo 86. This resulted in eviction, displacement, and marginalization of residents. An influx of tourists meant eviction and rent hikes to make more money. This led to people having to pool money together to share SROs. Sharing money and space in this way facilitated the sharing of drugs and needles within high-density living conditions. While there are so many people who played crucial roles in the harm reduction movement, I would like to talk about two pioneers. So Bud Osborne and Anne Livingston. Yeah, give them a round of applause, man. In 1997, they both attended a series of Vancouver Health Board meetings to demand action about the HIV and AIDS epidemic. Osborne was told that government action would soon become unnecessary because Vancouver's HIV infection rate would begin to fall because the virus had already killed so many people, and they were hoping that it would just run out of new bodies to infect. On September 25th, 1997, after months of harassing the Vancouver Health Board, Osborne finally got the board to acknowledge the HIV and AIDS epidemic as a public health emergency so that they can begin to take action. In 1995, Livingston was involved in a group called IV Feed that opened an illegal injection site. It was the first time anyone in Vancouver had said that drug users should have a place called their own. Livingston played a huge role in opening America's first legal supervised injection site called Insight. She also organized meetings in Oppenheimer Park for drug users to ask them what they would like to see change around drug policies. She believed that if policies were being made around substance use, drug users' voices should be involved. This eventually became the formation of a Vancouver area network of drug users, which is also known as VANDU. So these are some of the organization and initiatives that were formed to combat the epidemic through education, awareness, destigmatization, and access to treatment. Currently in Canada, only has about 40 OPS across Canada. 12 of them are in Vancouver alone. Many people argue that OPS and harm reduction in general enables and encourages people to use substances, thinking that if we don't give out supplies, people won't use. No person with addiction has ever said, well, I have heroin, but no new needles today, so I'm just not going to use. If people want to use, they will find a way. They will find a way. The most resourceful people I've known are people with addiction. They will find a way, and even if it means using it in an unsafe way. So these 40 sites have saved the Canadian medical system millions of dollars and has lessened the stress on the already strained medical system. Quicker overdose response means fewer ambulances called. Harm reduction supplies given out reduces hospitalization and less need for treatment for diseases and infections. So imagine how much more money we can save and how much pressure we can save from the medical system if we opened up more sites across the country and in every province. When someone overdoses at an OPS, they are revived quickly without the need to call paramedics. Right now in Vancouver, it takes about 25 minutes for paramedics to arrive to an overdose response. At my current job, I respond to about 2 or 3 overdoses on site every week. It takes less than 10 minutes to reverse an overdose if caught early enough. And I'm lucky enough to work for an organization that supplies us with oxygen tanks. And it does amazing work because we don't have to wait around for paramedics to come with their tools to deal with it, right? In the community, overdoses may not be recognized or treated early enough, and waiting 25 minutes for paramedics could mean life or death. OPS are a great first step in connecting to healthcare, housing, detox, and treatment. Someone who feels comfortable enough at their OPS might bring up issues that they might be struggling with, and then staff are able to connect them to the proper care. Overdose prevention sites are also a great way to combat child sexual exploitation. For example, glass pipes go for about $12 a piece. Instead of resorting to high-risk activities, you can go to an OPS to get them for free. I've also seen OPS serve as a safe and non-judgmental place for exploited youth to get connected to services. So here you can see pictures of a new needle and then what it looks like after 6 use. That's pretty bad. Imagine putting that into your skin in and out more than 6 times. Those jagged edges could, you know, imagine what that can do to your skin and the infections that come with that, right? There needs to be more harm reduction in other areas such as housing and shelter. Sorry, I'm going to skip through this. There are different types of shelters and there's different languages around them. So I've heard of like dry shelters, wet shelters, moist shelters, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to be using lower and higher barrier shelters. So on top of lacking shelter space, many shelters that are currently available do not offer the necessary supports. And when the tent sweeps were happening, the media and city kept saying how they offered shelter space to the people that were affected by the sweeps. And most people turned down the opportunity. And the blame was put on the people for not taking up these offers. But we got to ask ourselves, like, why would they were turning it down? So higher barrier shelters often require ID, which many unhoused people do not have. Couples often have to get separated to get a spot. More often than not, pets are not welcomed. And in my experience working in a shelter, people will turn down a bed to stay outside with their partners and pets. Storage is also a huge issue. I've seen people miss out on beds due to having a cart full of their personal items, and we can't accommodate those things in the shelter space because there's just not enough space. I've seen people not make it to their bed or not get a bed because they missed sign-up times and curfews due to having to work. And also considering like a lot of people have physical disabilities that like make it really hard for them to get to the shelters or from wherever they have to be during the day, right? One of the great things about lower barrier shelter is that they often give chances for relationship repair with the residents. When someone breaks shelter guidelines, instead of being barred forever and just, you're a bad person, you're an angry person, you're not a pleasant person to like be sheltering, that like they still deserve shelter and care, right? And the great thing about lower barrier shelter is that they often give chances for meaningful conversations with the residents to make sure that they understand why they're being barred for, and it's usually for maybe 2 weeks. I've seen higher barrier shelters, well, like you can get banned pretty much forever, but lower barrier shelters will give maximum maybe 2-3 weeks bar. But if you're able to have the conversation of like, what went wrong, what can we do better, how can we make this place, how can we make this a better situation for staff and the residents, and making them understand that they do get a chance to regain shelter access. And the reason why people always ask me why I work in the lowest barrier shelters in Vancouver, and honestly, it was because I was so sick of the high barrier bullshit that a lot of my homeless youth had to endure. I had a kid when I was working at a high barrier, one of the two youth shelters in Vancouver, and both are high barrier. One of my kids, he was staying there and got into a verbal altercation with the shelter manager, and he said some like not nice things to her. But he basically received an infinite bar from that shelter. He got off drugs, got into supportive housing for maybe like 2 years, but one day he had a slip up and they immediately kicked him out of his housing. He tried to go back to the shelter and be like, hey, can I stay here? They said, no, 2 years ago, you were being an asshole. And we will talk about it with the managers and see what we can do. And, I get a call from him Friday afternoon being like, I don't know where to go. I haven't been on the streets in 2 years. I don't know where to go and I'm scared. And there was nothing I could do for him. And I was hoping, I was like, just stick it out. Monday, we'll talk to the managers and try to get you a spot in shelter. But Saturday morning came, I got that phone call and he overdosed in a random SRO. And I just, I can't help but to be hurt and so angry at the system. Just because he fucking hurt your feelings. That's what it cost. That being said, I'm not saying high barrier shelters are plenty. If high barrier shelters are full, someone who is not using would not want to go to a low barrier shelter where they are surrounded and tempted by substance use. While it is true that there is a shortage in housing, it is also important to acknowledge that we are also lacking in proper supportive housing. When unhoused people are finally given housing, they are often evicted soon after due to the complex mental health challenges such as hoarding, setting their rooms or themselves on fire, and other fire hazards. I had a client receive housing after 15 years of being on the street. He really struggled with hoarding and was threatened with eviction if he didn't clean up. He managed to de-hoard his unit, but after a few months, we realized he wasn't really staying at his housing. When we asked him why, he said he didn't know how to live indoors. he basically he didn't want to lose his housing. So he basically just spent most of the time sleeping and hanging out on the streets and using his housing as storage. And like, that's not a way to live, right? So the great thing was that we moved him to a more supportive housing where there was home support staff that would come in like every other day to help him dehoard, help him teach him how not to hoard when he was staying. And eventually he was able to manage it mostly by himself. So housing is healthcare. And you can't separate the two. Many housing programs are so high barrier that they require residents to be sober and participate in programming. One of the buildings I work out of the downtown, in the downtown east side, houses basically people that were once deemed unhousable. And this was made possible due to the structure of the building, making it basically fireproof and harm reduction care to the residents. So they were communal areas where they could use out in the open so that staff can be there in case of overdoses. It was just like a lot more holistic care went into the residents, and a lot of them are still housed there like years after now, and they were once deemed unhousable. So like that building obviously isn't perfect, but I think that's definitely the directions that we need to go. People who don't want to be sober deserve housing, right? Why are we gatekeeping that? You cannot have healthcare without housing. Many residents on the downtown east side are constantly struggling with sepsis. Unhoused people are often forced to use out in public, which puts them in danger, such as falling over onto concrete, getting assaulted, getting hit by cars, and other physical dangers. And after going to the hospital for wound care, and they are released back into the streets. How are they supposed to keep their wounds clean if they don't have access to showers and a clean place to sleep? So this is Duncan Higgins. He's one of my managers back in Vancouver. He's a senior housing manager, and he manages like many of the SROs in the downtown east side. And I just want to play a clip of what he has to say on harm reduction in housing. No.
We can support individuals in simple places, recognizing that consumption is simple and very human of navigating this. And we actually meaningfully judgment on that and recognize it as a perfectly reasonable mechanism. Then I think what we can do is have human-centered care, human-centered approaches that really take apart these ideas of our judgment and consumption. One of the great challenges in healthcare, and we only domain where often we see harm reduction being implemented are corners of healthcare where ideas of moral personal failing intervene. You're sick because you're a moral personal failing, right? And the only domain of illness whereby that is an acceptable notion carried by physicians and policymakers and our colleagues and mental health workers is in the domain of addiction medicine and addiction care. In no other place is it able to be accepted that we can describe blame and moral failing, shortcoming in the human for the patient, right? For any condition. What we accept is actually build it into many intervention. Hey, if you get dry or clean, we'll give you a hug. So imagine kind of any other framework, right? Hey, if you stop having that pneumonia, we'll give you access to social services. What are you talking about? Absolutely not. And yet both of us and many individuals here all the time. We must participate. And the participation isn't generally in programming supported. The participation component that I see time and time again is an abstinence. And so abstinence is the only pathway that we do in possible approvable care consumption. And it excludes all. I see when I see housing as harm reduction, but housing done well and better authentically be destigmatized, the ability for people to go inside, talk to individuals, use a place where the consumption doesn't threaten their housing and threaten the program they're sheltering. As you've heard me say before, but the only conversation around relying on the shelter I want to have, and better to believe. It has no sense. I mean, listen, you should fix that. But alternatively, I know no point in discussion. It is this idea, of course, that I think we could carry is that we have to fundamentally keep separate the user from the non-user. You notice, right? If this is a dry shelter, this is not this is a moist shelter, whatever that move to be around that, which we don't do in this. We separate a huge swath into that individuals' health outcomes, right? Your health outcomes will be different than my health outcomes. My conditions will be different. Either of our conditions could put us on housing and support environments, with the exception of if one of us is the user. And then I, somehow by virtue of my consumption, my pathway survival, and my chronic pain and trauma, these things could sell you and could sell you staff. I think harm reduction counseling just holds at its core the idea that we're client-centered, and therefore the client is able to be a place where they can define for themselves what doing well looks like.
That's Duncan Higgins, everybody. So just to wrap things up, I just also want to note that when we don't practice harm reduction and we're not client-centered, we are actually jeopardizing the safety and well-being of frontline workers as well. In one of my programs, youth treatment, another staff had made the unilateral decision to discharge a youth due to the youth calling him some not nice names. And the impact of the team was grieving, not having closure, and not knowing that the decision was not harm reductive. It wasn't client-centered, it wasn't trauma-informed. I came back from a weekend and this youth was gone, and all for what? Because he called you some mean names? Does it mean, yeah, he called a male staff a pussy, and he was like, "You're out of here." And I'm like, well, how are we?
He was scared because pussies are strong.
Well, yeah, for sure. And we can't be gatekeeping who doesn't deserve treatment, especially when it comes to youth who are so young and vulnerable. And when they're in a place of trauma and a place of addiction, how are they supposed to learn compassion and better themselves without us giving them that space and the ability to? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much to all of you for that incredible panel. Let's open it up for questions.
Everyone, this is a question for Aileen. I know it's early on. Have you seen anything?
I think your mic's off or you're not close enough. Get in there.
Okay. Thank you everyone for a really good presentation. This is a question more specifically for Aileen, but I think everybody's opinion matters as well on this. I know it's early on in BC, but have you noticed any changes yet with decriminalizing various substances yet in terms of your work?
Well, so in BC, it's legal to carry 3.5 grams of drugs on you. 2.5? Combined substances. Yeah, so that's a step in the direction. It's definitely not enough. I mean, 2.5 on someone isn't enough to keep someone alive all day. So there is it's a step in the right direction, but they are starting to do some decriminalization in terms of harm reduction to see what can keep people alive a bit longer. It's not enough, but we're starting.
Also, weed should be under an 8.
Absolutely.
I'd also like to touch on that subject. To be honest, fuck decriminalization. We need full legalization across the board.
Absolutely. Yes. That is the dream.
One thing we are
Honestly.
very much already seeing in BC with the decriminalization that's happening is that, legalization, whatever they want to call it, if you can only have X amount of grams on you, who gets checked? Who's got grams? White boy walking down the street is not getting checked to see if he's got grams on him. It is Black people, Indigenous people, homeless people. So when we are only decriminalization, we at first thought this was going to lead to legalization. If the cops are supporting something, we shouldn't be. They fucking love decrim because it keeps power in their court. If it is fully legalized, you don't get to stop someone for what they're carrying because everything is allowed. So yeah, decriminalization is a dangerous trap and we've got to be pushing for legalization, period.
support that 100%.
Any other questions?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentations. I have a question for everybody, and actually a bit of a shameless plug for anyone who is a decision maker within Ottawa who can sort of hear these things. But right now, there are no low barrier options within Ottawa for women. There are a lot of complexities that exist. I know that Ottawa isn't alone in this, but certainly for women, we only have high barrier, Eileen. So when you compared low barrier to high barrier, I was very much resonated. Getting women the resources that they need within Ottawa is extremely complex. I'm with the Canadian Mental Health Association, but I work very closely with Ottawa Inner City Health down at Shepherds of Good Hope, and the population I serve are homeless women. So over time, I think what I'm noticing is women are choosing to remain with their intimate partner their abusers. They're staying in complex situations. They're increasing substance use, sleeping rough, sleeping in stairwells. And these needs aren't being addressed. In fact, we were able to have our supervised consumption site move into the Shepherds of Good Hope, which is an amazing option for people, but it did displace our women's special care unit. And I don't know if everybody who's in this room is aware of that. Women's special care was a program that supported 15 women who were often sex trade workers involved in human trafficking. And we no longer have an option for them. And what I'm finding, as this is a community that I support, these women are no longer receiving the resources and the supports that they need because of where they're choosing to stay to find an ounce of safety. So that was my shameless plug. I also have two questions, and I'm just wondering what the barriers are that you identify for women. While they might be similar, where in Peterborough and in Vancouver, just wondering maybe trends or things that you see as barriers, and what are ways that you've looked to address them or support women with complex needs?
I don't think there's any specific barriers in Peterborough that are necessarily different from what you're facing here in Ottawa or what we might see in Vancouver. Because it's such a big question, I'm just going to laser in on my specific experience working with our KT6 crew doing this peer work. Aside from Scotty, shout out Scotty, everyone who came and is working at this conference is a woman. And that's because we are providing a space that is doing its best to be anti-patriarchal, is doing its best to dismantle those systems, and we are paying women who show up and do this work. So that's maybe like a very, very specific answer as to how we can begin reducing barriers is in our organizations, bring in women in the most low barrier way with our own org that we can and pay them to help us do this work, and they will have much better solutions. Past that, I can't really answer because I've never been a homeless woman. I've never been homeless, so I don't have that experience. But if you bring in the homeless women of your community and you pay them and you give them an environment that is not zero barrier, because we know zero barrier doesn't exist, but is low barrier because we're working to dismantle the systems that are keeping them oppressed outside the doors, you'll begin to hear a lot of solutions from them. So I would, do that.
On that note, thanks, Melissa. So one of the things that the KT6 are doing is creating their own jobs and positions that you all fucking need them to fill. And that is the harm reduction system navigator, because they understand what it's like to go through all the systems that have been oppressing them since the dawn of time. And they want and will do the work that you need them to do. And when we allow them to do the work, they have freedom from the oppressive behaviors that they sit in while still trying to be well. And by being well, I mean being able to use. So they can come to the KT6 groups. They can meet up with other women. They can learn how to be a system navigator in harm reduction and get paid, which takes them away from the dangerous situations that they might have been living in. So, and when we allow them to be the harm reduction system navigators and allow them to be the professionals and be seen as the professionals they are in what they need and what others need, doing wound care, understanding what frostbite looks like and how to treat frostbite and where to find somebody, and maybe the treatment that they've had from other people just to get a fucking lighter. Just like hire women, train, take them for what the experiences they have and bring them into your organizations and have them be paid to be the professionals that they are.
Do you want to add anything, Aileen? Or?
So I'm getting lost in the question a little bit. So I think the question was
Services for women.
Just sleeping for a couple hours. Another great thing about the organization I work for is a lot of our housings are specific for women who are like who are experiencing like so many barriers to access other resources. So they're able to get housing, and then we put in safety measures where they will tell front desk and our mental health workers who to let in and who not to let in. You know, today I have like a crazy stalker guy, please watch out for him. He looks like this and this. And we're able to keep them safe that way, but still allowing them to do the work that they need to do to get by in their lives. I don't know if that answers your questions, but yeah.
Because I have a question while other people are generating theirs. I think one of the places that is the most high barrier is hospitals. And I'm lucky that I work mainly out in the community, but I also sometimes work in the hospital. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about creating harm reduction spaces in hospitals. I know there've been some discussions and some work done. I think in Alberta, there was maybe some consumption in a site, maybe people can correct me. I know at the hospital I work at, it's been sort of a discussion on and off for years, but the reason people don't go to hospital is because they can't use or they are discharged if they start to use. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about harm reduction in hospitals and overdose prevention, sort of service care spaces and yeah.
I think we're all chomping. Nobody wants to go first.
Tracy, yeah. My girl Tracy.
Yeah.
So the healthcare professionals here who are in the hospitals, listen to the workers when we show up with our client. One, do you guys know how hard it is to get someone into your building to begin with? It's difficult. Two, don't make us sit there and wait for 6 hours when we're coming to you and saying, we're really struggling here. We're here for like a suicide disclosure. Can we like wrap this up? Stop pushing it down on the triage list. I get that you guys have a triage system. I get how that works. We all have triage systems in our own services as well. But you know what? When someone tells us they're suicidal, they go to the top of that triage list because you don't know what they're going to do and if they're going to take their life in that moment. The fact that they're in that room and they're saying, I need help and I need support, y'all need to listen to that. So like baseline on that one. And then three, when they are coming in with people like us and we're sitting there and we're telling you, they've disclosed this, we've seen this, this is what's going on. Here is literally paperwork that you guys use to assess suicide. And we just did this an hour ago at our program. Can you take them? And you refuse to form them? That's unacceptable. And it's because there is this idea that the intelligence or the validity of your guys' opinion is more than ours. And I brought this up yesterday and I was shut down. And it honestly made me so angry because what I was trying to do was I was trying to explain to you that we have these conversations and we know where our kids are at. We know where our community members are at, and you guys not listening to us, like,
Yep.
and you want to call us professionals, you want to deem us professionals, you call us frontline workers, peer support workers, whatever it is. And then at the end of the day, you guys treat us the same way you treat our homies, our community members who we're trying to get help and support for.
And then you want us to bring them into you to get treated like shit.
Yeah. It makes no sense. So when you guys are talking about like, what can you do in a hospital? How about trust when workers come up to you and say, hey, can we be taken to a private room? I get that like they're over flooded. I get y'all are short staffed. I worked in a detox unit, medical detox facility. I understand. But if you want to sit here and walk or talk the talk around how their lives are just as important, then actually do the actions to show that their lives are just as important. So that I'm not sitting in an emergency room with a kid who's suicidal for 6 hours just to leave with him, even though your staff have deemed him dangerous enough to have a police officer on him while we're in your emergency room. That makes no sense.
I'll be super short on this one because I could talk forever, but let's be real, outside of the 40 overdose prevention sites in this country, hospitals are the only legal place you can get fentanyl, right? Like the floor up are people who doctors are using medical grade unadulterated fentanyl to manage people's surgeries, and someone comes in who is using street fentanyl, and that's somehow different. Yeah, to echo what was said, have some goddamn respect for people who use drugs. That is a huge institutional change that needs to happen. But it really comes down to the fact that drug use is morally neutral and it is treated as fucking evil by hospitals. I'll stop there.
Oh, here. You mean we should have had one here,
And yeah,
like right here.
Right now.
We
right in that
invited
corner.
people.
yeah.
You invited people with lived experience to come here and didn't have a safe consumption room
Okay.
or a naloxone on a table or a naloxone training or. Yeah.
Find us after. I'd love to talk.
Yeah.
Sorry, what's your
Oh.
opinion on the idea of having, low barrier shelters or low barrier safe consumption sites within a hospital setting?
Oh, my opinion goes that they should be everywhere. Like if you're working Google and you're working at Google and you're running Google, I'm going big because that's what the Yukon is doing, is making the Yukon Whitehorse is building in this giant .com area, and they want to say that they're doing good work up there. And I'm like, no, you are not. Put in harm reduction. If you're going to bring in a Google building and bring people up there and staff them, you better put a harm reduction room in there,
So having,
because everybody can fucking be a drug user
yeah, so low barrier shelters, low barrier.
everywhere.
In hospitals.
Once it's
and-
wherever, then it starts to look like it's normal,
Yeah.
and people feel normal and they ask for help.
And greater access to,
Yeah.
prompt medical
Yeah.
care and interventions.
I'm
Potentially.
all for like, clean supply, safe supply and OPS within hospitals, because I wasn't going to bring this up, but I
Yay.
did work with a youth who was going to die of sepsis. And it took me 3 days to wrangle her to a hospital. And it was back and forth because the wait was too long and she was withdrawing. And then, when nurses are finally tending to her and she's going through painful withdrawals and she's lashing out and you're asking her why she's being so angry, why she's so cranky, why she's crying, why she's not able to regulate herself. She's in so much fucking pain. And had that, and like that 3-day adventure of me looking for her in the downtown east side, worrying that she was going to die any second, that could have been prevented had there been an OPS at the hospital. Instead, she kept having to leave the hospital to go downtown east side to look for dope. And I had to chase her every time. It took me 3 days to get her into the hospital.
My name's Scotty, and I don't know, I really got to share that I can't get medical fucking help without security or police escorting me from the hospital that's in the city of Peterborough. I almost died with an abscess in my arm, like 14 centimeters by 34 centimeters, and they would not treat me. They said because I refused to take my diabetic meds, because that's what they have to say they have to look after first. And I'm like, I went to Kingston to go to detox. They sent me straight to the hospital. And they said, anybody who did an ultrasound on your arm would know that there's nothing that's going to break through that abscess. 36 hours, 72 hours, I was in emergency surgery. They would have lost my arm or possibly died shortly after if I didn't get attention. So like, it's not just Peterborough, because Toronto treated me the same way too, and I don't know. Anyways, I just want to share that this is my reality. I don't want to go to the fucking hospital, man, because I'm going to get fucking put in cuffs and dragged away, man. And I don't know. A lot of the stuff that's just been said just hits home, man. I got severe mental, emotional disorders, and nobody seems to accept me for who I am. Anyways, that's all I have.
We accept you, Scotty.
Well, yes, you guys do, yeah.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a thought. One of the things that we've noticed with our street medicine team in Pittsburgh is that there is a sort of gradation of responses that our team members get depending on what their race and what their title is, even though they're all members of our street medicine team when they accompany one of our street friends to the hospital. And one of the things I love about the organization that I work with within the large hospital system is that we see that we have two patients, and that one is the person that we are working with, and the other is the hospital system, and that the hospital system is more ill. And what we have noticed is when our community health worker or our social worker who is Black takes someone into the emergency room, our Black social worker gets asked if they're family members of the person that they're bringing in. And it's so insulting. Our community health worker is a person who has himself used drugs, who has a mental health diagnosis, who has experienced homelessness, and is not treated the same as when one of our doctors goes into the emergency room. And so a lot of times what we do when we take people to the emergency room, it may be the community health worker that's there with the person when they need to go in, but we also try to stay in really close contact via text message and otherwise, so that if needed, one of the physicians can show up and use their, honestly, all of our physicians are white, to use their whiteness and their doctor degrees to try to make things better, not just for the person we brought into the ED, but also for our own coworkers. And we're still trying to change that system too. But at the same time, I still wonder if that's good enough, is that enough for solidarity? And I don't have the answer to that.
I don't think we have the answer yet. I mean, we have to just keep working on it and listening, and that sounds hokey and full of shit. But the fact that we're invited here to talk and you're asking us how things can be better, that's a nice start. We're just gonna keep dismantling shit, just letting you know. It's important work. And I think if I can, this probably doesn't go along with it, but I was talking about this yesterday with somebody after at the restaurant. When the KT6 were writing their job description, they wanted to make sure that they didn't use the word client in their description of what they would be doing with the help that they would be giving the person. So they put in the person. And with using the word and the term the person, it takes out that hierarchy of client and nurse and doctor and teacher and police officer. They're a person. They are a person, not black, not white, not any, they are a person. And if you can continue to talk about people as fucking people, then the hierarchy and the fear can happen. It's a lot to dismantle and it's a lot of shit and it's hard, but you can change your dog's name. You can call somebody a person instead of like my client. Ugh.
Thank you for your presentation and I think very thoughtful insights. I just have a question around the Safer Supply program. I think it's sort of happening in Toronto a little bit, but more so in Vancouver. What are the service user perspectives on Safer Supply? Do people view it as an actually helpful thing, or is it just like a medicalization of, like it's another thing that a doctor has to prescribe? And considering that the crisis is not an overdose crisis, it's a toxic drug supply crisis, right? So like Safer Supply is part of the harm reduction process, but do service users actually find it like aligned with their values? Is it just like another medicalization that you have to like go to a doctor or be nice and so they write you a script?
That's something we spoke about yesterday, actually, because I spent a lot of time during the day yesterday with people that are using, and we talked about it. And the fact that they can't trust doctors and they don't want to go to you to ask for a safe supply makes them not trust. I mean, they've been screwed over by the medical system for such a long time. And it only takes once to be disregarded to make you feel disregarded for the rest of your life. So that going to a doctor to getting safe supply doesn't make them feel shiny. And like, well, what has to happen is that it needs to work with the people with lived experience as the system navigators to bring them into you without feeling ambushed and without feeling fear. And you, the doctors, need to go out in the field and see it and be it and earn their trust, but don't go ambushing. You walk with a system navigator and you walk with the peers. You listen to them. You go to where the frostbite is and you don't approach first. So they're not believing that safe supply from you is going to be okay. From what I gathered from yesterday, they're much safer for them to walk down the street and score. They're not going to get shit on. Maybe they might get, robbed, but that's sometimes better than getting shit on from another doctor. And I don't mean that for me saying that. I'm like, that was what was said yesterday. So I'm at the system navigation, the peer support is what you need.
This is another topic I'm super passionate about. So I'm just going to say one thing that someone who, for instance, gets their dilaudid from Safe Supply and sells it and then buys fentanyl, that is a successful outcome, right? That is more medical potency, unadulterated opioids hitting our community. That isn't like, that's just an unabashed good thing. I think that there's two kinds of safe supply. One is very much that medicalization that you described. It's another thing that doctors get to do. This is another way that we get to sink our hooks into people and bring them into these structures of hierarchy. And then the other is safe supply along the way to legalization. So I think that I'm lucky in Peterborough, for instance, our safe supply pilot is being coordinated by someone who herself used drugs, who landed on the Lower East Side, who has seen the worst of what it's like to use opioids and is able to do a much better job helping connect people to that program. There's obviously doctors involved that need to prescribe it, but the initial contact is not with the doctors and the medicalization. It is with people who are known in community. And she, I don't think, is allowed to advocate for legalization at her current job, but she wholeheartedly believes it. And she is doing the work that she can to squeeze in through the cracks to move it towards legalization as opposed to, just more doctor shit.
And just to speak on that, I I do have a few residents who are consistently on like a program where they get safe supply, and they've told me that it has improved their health exponentially. Like there's this one resident who was living at the shelter for quite a number of years, and he was using street drugs. And then when he was put on the program, he was able to actually keep a 9-to-5 job because he wasn't dealing with like so many health issues that came with the street drugs. One of the really great programs within the company that I work for is called the Drinkers Lounge, and it's a program where people who use alcohol, they're able to basically subscribe, like it's like $50 a month or whatever, and they're able to go and like brew their own alcohol. It's not great, it doesn't taste amazing, but it's still alcohol. And they're able to trade in things like hand sanitizers, mouthwash, things that they normally would have substituted alcohol with. And now they're able to get a safe supply of alcohol. And this has increased their health by a lot, because when you're drinking alcohol sanitizer, which was happening quite a lot in Vancouver, you pass out, you black out, you hit your head on concrete, and that's trauma to the head. That's wounds, right? Like, and when they had access to actual alcohol beverages through the drinker lounge, a lot of that was going away, and people's health were improving by a lot.
Knowledge, right?
Yeah,
They
who
learned
knew?
something. And they learned something, and they're saving their own lives at the same time. And that's so
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah, and they're able to contribute, and there's a community of them that like gets together once a month, and they just brew alcohol and beer together. And
Love it.
yeah,
We might steal that, by the way.
take it.
We have time for maybe one last question. And if not, then it's the break. Thank you so much for an incredible panel. So if everybody could be back at 2:45.
Remember to follow us on Instagram, Frontline Baddies, for memes.
Follow them, because then you'll see us too. That's a good plug. I like that.
That's a good one.